I never thought I would wake up one Saturday morning to find a full-sized playground sitting smack in the middle of my 3-acre field in Riverside, California. But that is exactly what happened on the first weekend of March. The sound of children screaming with delight and rubber mulch being poured woke me up at 7 in the morning, and when I stumbled to my back window with a cup of coffee, I nearly dropped the entire mug on my bedroom floor. There were at least 20 workers swarming my property, installing swings, slides, and what looked like a climbing structure shaped like a castle. I threw on jeans and a shirt and rushed outside, my bare feet slipping into boots as I ran. The cool morning air hit my face as I jogged across my lawn toward the construction site. A woman with a clipboard stood near a truck, barking orders at the workers. She wore a bright pink visor and had that particular haircut that screamed trouble, short and angular with blonde highlights that caught the morning sun. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "What the hell is going on here?" The woman turned to face me with an expression of annoyance, as if I were the one interrupting her day. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with the kind of fake politeness that made my teeth hurt. "You can start by explaining why there is a playground being built on my property," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the anger bubbling up inside me. She glanced at her clipboard, then back at me. "This is community property, designated for the Meadowbrook HOA recreational development. If you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next board meeting." "I am not part of any HOA," I said firmly. "This is my land, private property, and you are trespassing." The woman's expression shifted from annoyance to something closer to condescension. "Sir, I am Karen Mayfield, president of the Meadowbrook HOA. According to our records, this parcel was designated as common area when the development was planned 5 years ago. Now, if you do not mind, we have work to do." I stared at her in disbelief. "Lady, I have owned this property for 8 years. I bought it long before any development went in around here. This is my field and you need to stop construction immediately." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "I think there has been some misunderstanding. The county approved this playground 2 months ago. We have all the proper permits." "Permits for my land?" I asked, my voice rising. "How did you get permits for property you do not own?" She waved her hand dismissively. "The plot maps clearly show this as common area." "Now please, you are disrupting our timeline. We need this playground completed by next week for the spring festival." I could not believe what I was hearing. This woman was so convinced of her rightness that she would not even consider the possibility of a mistake. "Stop the construction," I said slowly and clearly. "Right now, or I am calling the police." Karen's face flushed red. "You will do no such thing. We have every right to be here. If you continue to harass us, I will call the police myself and have you removed from HOA property." That was it. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Karen's eyes widened, but she held her ground, crossing her arms over her chest as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. Within 20 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up to the edge of my property. Officer Martinez stepped out of the first car, a tall man with dark hair and a patient expression. His partner, Officer Chen, followed close behind. They approached us as Karen immediately launched into her explanation, waving her clipboard and permits in the air. "Officers, this man is trying to stop a legally permitted construction project," she said shrilly. "We have been planning this playground for months, and he is trespassing on HOA common area." Officer Martinez held up his hand. "Let us slow down here. Sir, can you explain your side?" "My name is Thomas Quinn," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "I have owned this 3-acre property for 8 years. I have the deed in my house. This woman and her HOA are building on my land without permission. Do you have documentation proving ownership? Officer Chen asked. Absolutely. Give me 5 minutes and I will get everything. I jogged back to my house, my heart pounding. In my home office, I pulled out the file cabinet and grabbed the folder containing my property deed, survey maps, and tax records. When I returned, Karen was still talking animatedly to the officers, gesturing at her permits. Officer Martinez examined my documents carefully, then looked at Karen's permits. He frowned, comparing the two sets of papers. Madam, these plot numbers do not match. His deed shows this as parcel 247. Your permit shows construction approved for parcel 253. Karen snatched the papers from his hand, studying them. Her confident expression faltered. There must be some mistake in the paperwork. The county clearly approved this location. The county approved a location, Officer Martinez said. But it appears it was not this location. You will need to stop construction until this gets sorted out. We cannot stop, Karen protested. We have contractors scheduled, materials delivered, deposits paid. The Spring Festival is in 10 days. If you continue construction on property that you cannot prove you own, that is trespassing and property damage, Officer Chen said firmly. You need to halt work immediately and verify your property boundaries. Karen's face went through several shades of red before settling on a deep crimson. She turned to the construction foreman and said something I could not hear, but he nodded and started waving the workers away from the site. The sound of machinery died down, and suddenly my field was eerily quiet except for the morning birds. This is not over, Karen said to me, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. The HOA will be reviewing this situation, and I guarantee you will be held responsible for the delays and cost overruns. I look forward to that conversation, I replied evenly. Especially the part where you explain how you got permits for someone else's property. After the officers took statements from both of us and left, I stood in my field surveying the half-built playground. There were posts cemented into the ground, piles of rubber mulch, a partially assembled swing set, and several pallets of lumber. Karen and her workers had cleared out, leaving everything behind like debris from a storm. I called my attorney, Richard Brennan, whom I had used during the property purchase. His secretary put me through immediately when I explained the situation. Thomas, that is quite a mess, Richard said after I finished recounting the morning's events. First thing we need to do is get a licensed surveyor out there to confirm your property boundaries beyond any doubt. Then we need to send a cease and desist letter to this HOA. How fast can we make this happen? I asked. I know a surveyor who might be able to squeeze you in early next week. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos, keep records of everyone who comes onto your property, and Thomas, do not let them restart construction. The rest of the weekend was relatively quiet, though I kept checking my field every few hours, half expecting Karen to show up with her crew again. I spent Saturday afternoon photographing the construction site from every angle, making notes of what had been installed and what damage had been done to my field. On Sunday, I researched the Meadowbrook HOA online. They had a website with a section about community improvements, and there, prominently featured, was an announcement about the new playground. The article was written by Karen herself, boasting about how she had spearheaded the project to bring more family-friendly amenities to the neighborhood. There were even artist renderings of the completed playground, showing happy children playing on equipment that was currently sitting half-built on my property. Monday morning, Richard called with good news. I got Dave Peterson to bump you up on his schedule. He can be there Wednesday morning at 8 to do a complete survey of your property boundaries. It will cost about $1,500 for a rush job, but it will give us ironclad documentation. Do it, I said without hesitation. I want this settled before they try to come back. I am also drafting the cease and desist letter to send to the HOA board. We will deliver it by certified mail and email today. Wednesday morning arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Dave Peterson showed up right at 8 in a white truck with surveying equipment loaded in the back. He was a man in his 60s with weathered skin and steady hands, the kind of professional who inspired confidence just by his demeanor. "So you got yourself an HOA problem," Dave said as we walked out to the field. "I have been doing this 40 years, and let me tell you, HOA disputes are becoming more common. These organizations think they can do whatever they want." "This one certainly did," I replied, gesturing at the playground equipment. Dave spent the next 4 hours meticulously measuring, setting up his transit, checking property markers, and comparing everything to the original survey done when I purchased the property. I watched him work, impressed by his thoroughness. He even found the iron stakes that marked 2 of my corners, buried under years of grass and soil. Around noon, Dave packed up his equipment and met me on my back porch. "Well, Thomas, it is pretty cut and dry. This entire area where they started building is solidly within your property boundaries. Not even close to being on the line, they are at least 30 feet inside your lot." "How sure are you?" I asked. "Sure enough to testify in court if it comes to that," Dave said. "I will have the full report to you and your attorney by Friday, complete with updated survey maps, photographs, and my certification. But I can tell you right now that HOA does not have a leg to stand on." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "Thank you, Dave. Seriously. Just doing my job." But word of advice: document everything from here on out. People like this HOA president you described, they do not like being wrong. This might get uglier before it gets better. He was right. That very afternoon, I received a hand-delivered letter from the Meadowbrook HOA. The envelope was marked urgent and contained a 2-page letter on official letterhead. Karen's signature was at the bottom, along with 2 other board members. The letter was astounding in its audacity. It claimed that I was interfering with approved community development, that my property may have been incorrectly recorded with the county, and that the HOA was prepared to take legal action if I did not allow them to complete the playground construction. They gave me 48 hours to respond and suggested I attend an emergency board meeting scheduled for Friday evening. I scanned the letter and emailed it to Richard immediately. He called me back within the hour, and I could hear the disbelief in his voice. "They are doubling down," Richard said. "This is either incredible arrogance or they genuinely believe they are right. Either way, we will be ready. Once we have Dave's survey report, we will respond with our own letter and evidence. I suggest you attend that meeting on Friday, though." "I will go with you. I want to see what they have to say." Friday evening came quickly. The Meadowbrook HOA held their meetings in the community clubhouse, a modest building near the development's main entrance. Richard met me in the parking lot at 6:30, carrying a leather briefcase that I knew contained copies of my deed, the original survey, and Dave's new report, which had arrived that morning as promised. Inside, the meeting room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Karen was in the center, flanked by 2 other people I did not recognize. There were maybe 20 residents scattered throughout the chairs, most of them looking bored or distracted by their phones. Karen's eyes locked onto me the moment I walked in. Her expression hardened, and she leaned over to whisper something to the man on her right, a heavy-set guy in his 50s with a red face and thinning hair. Richard and I took seats in the front row. Karen called the meeting to order and went through some standard HOA business, approving minutes from the last meeting, discussing landscaping contracts, and reviewing the budget. Finally, she reached the agenda item I knew was coming. Item 7, Karen announced, her voice taking on a sharp edge. Unauthorized interference with community development project. 2 weeks ago, the HOA began construction on an approved playground in the community common area. A resident, Thomas Quinn, who lives adjacent to the development, has interfered with this construction and made false claims about property ownership. False claims, I said loudly, unable to stop myself. Karen shot me a look. You will have a chance to speak. As I was saying, Mr. Quinn called the police and stopped our construction, causing delays and additional costs to the HOA. We have reviewed our records and permits, and we are confident that the playground location is correct. However, Mr. Quinn refuses to acknowledge the HOA's rights and continues to trespass on community property. The man next to Karen, who I learned was named Dale Harrison, the HOA vice president, cleared his throat. We are here tonight to formally notify Mr. Quinn that continued interference will result in legal action. The HOA has consulted with our attorney, and we are prepared to seek an injunction to complete the playground, as well as damages for the delays. Richard stood up smoothly. May I address the board? Karen looked irritated but nodded. State your name and purpose. I am Richard Brennan, attorney for Thomas Quinn. I appreciate the opportunity to address these claims, which are not only false but potentially libelous. My client owns the property in question, and your playground is being constructed on his private land without permission. That is not true, Karen interrupted. We have permits. You have permits for the wrong parcel, Richard said calmly. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. I have here Mr. Quinn's property deed, recorded with Riverside County 8 years ago. I also have the original survey from that purchase, and a new survey completed this week by licensed surveyor David Peterson. All of these documents confirm that the location where you began construction is entirely within Mr. Quinn's property boundaries. He walked forward and placed copies of the documents on the table in front of the board members. Karen snatched them up, her eyes scanning the pages quickly. Dale and the third board member, a woman named Patricia something, leaned in to look as well. This cannot be right, Karen muttered. The county gave us permits. The county gave you permits for parcel 253, Richard said. Mr. Quinn owns parcel 247. Those are 2 different pieces of land. I would suggest you review your records to determine how this error occurred, but that is your problem to solve. What matters now is that you have trespassed on private property, installed structures without permission, and are now threatening the property owner with legal action. I strongly advise you to remove all equipment and materials from Mr. Quinn's land immediately and issue a formal apology. The room had gone completely silent. The residents in the chairs were now paying full attention, whispering among themselves. Karen's face had gone pale, then flushed again with color. We will need to verify this with our attorney, she said stiffly. Please do, Richard replied. In the meantime, we will be expecting the removal of all construction materials by next Friday. If they are not removed, we will consider them abandoned property and dispose of them accordingly. We will also be seeking compensation for damages to Mr. Quinn's field. Dale stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Now hold on just a minute. Even if there was some kind of clerical error, this is clearly a misunderstanding. We are all neighbors here. There is no need for threats and legal action. I am sure we can work something out. Work what out? I asked, standing up as well. You built on my property without asking. You refused to stop when I told you it was my land. You called me a liar and a trespasser. And now your president is threatening to sue me. What exactly is there to work out?" Patricia, the third board member, finally spoke up. She was a thin woman with gray hair and glasses. "I think we need to table this discussion until we can meet with our attorney and review these documents. This is clearly more complicated than we understood." "It is not complicated at all," I said. "You made a mistake, a big one. Now you need to fix it." Karen's hands were shaking as she shuffled the papers in front of her. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced abruptly. "The board will reconvene in private to discuss this matter." Richard and I left the clubhouse and walked to the parking lot. Several residents followed us out and a few approached with questions. "Is it true they built on your property?" one woman asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "Completely on my land." "Oh my God," another resident said, a younger guy in his 30s. "Do you know how much money we have put into that playground? Karen got approval for a special assessment. Every homeowner in the development paid an extra $800 for this." That was news to me. $800 per house. "There are 73 homes in Meadowbrook," the first woman said. "That is almost $60,000. I felt a bit of sympathy for the residents, but it was not my fault their HOA board had screwed up. I am sorry about that, but it does not change the fact that they built on property they do not own." Over the next week, things escalated quickly. On Monday, I received a call from someone named Gregory Winters, who identified himself as the HOA's attorney. He was professional but firm, explaining that he was reviewing the documents and would be in touch. On Tuesday, a different surveyor showed up at my property, saying he had been hired by the HOA to verify the boundaries. I allowed him access, and he spent several hours doing measurements before leaving without comment. Wednesday brought a letter from Gregory Winters, admitting that the playground had been constructed on my property due to an error in the HOA's plot maps. However, the letter then proposed that I grant the HOA an easement to allow the playground to remain, arguing that relocating it would be cost prohibitive and that the structure would benefit the community. I called Richard immediately. "They want me to just let them keep it there." "They are grasping at straws," Richard said. "Without your consent, they cannot use your property, and you have no obligation to give them an easement. What if I say no? Then they have to remove everything and either refund the homeowners or find a new location and start over. Either way, it is their problem, not yours." I thought about it for all of 10 seconds. "I am saying no." Richard drafted a response rejecting the easement proposal and reiterating our demand for removal of all materials. We also added a claim for damages to my field, including the cost of repairing the torn-up ground, removing the cemented posts, and reseeding the grass. Richard calculated it at around $12,000. That is when Karen lost it completely. On Thursday morning, I woke up to find her standing in my field with a camera, taking photographs of the playground equipment. When I went out to confront her, she turned on me with fury. "This is your fault," she screamed. "Do you have any idea what you have done? The spring festival is in 2 days and we have no playground. I have 73 families who paid for this, expecting it to be ready. I have vendors scheduled, a ribbon-cutting ceremony planned, and you are destroying everything because of some technicality." "It is not a technicality," I said firmly. "It is my property. You should have checked before you started building." "We did check," Karen insisted. "The county gave us permits. How were we supposed to know they made a mistake?" "That is between you and the county," I replied. "But you do not get to keep using my land because it is convenient for you." Karen's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of rage, not sadness. You are a selfish, horrible person. This playground was for the children, for the community, and you are taking it away from them." "I am not taking anything," I said. "I never offered my property for a playground. You took it without asking. There is a big difference." She stormed off, and I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. That afternoon, I came home from running errands to find graffiti spray painted on the playground equipment. Words like thief and selfish and Quinn is a jerk covered the slides and swings. My first thought was that Karen had done it, but then I realized that would be insane even for her, since she would be vandalizing HOA property. I called the police again, and Officer Martinez came out to file a report. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked as he photographed the graffiti. "Probably someone from the HOA community who is angry about the situation," I said, "but I do not have proof." "We will increase patrols in the area," Martinez said. "But honestly, Mr. Quinn, this kind of neighborhood dispute can bring out the worst in people. You might want to consider security cameras." I took his advice and ordered a set of wireless cameras that evening, paying for next day delivery. Friday morning, I spent 2 hours installing 4 cameras covering different angles of my property. The timing was perfect, because Friday afternoon brought a new development. A moving truck pulled up, and a crew of workers began removing the playground equipment. I watched from my porch as they carefully disassembled the swings, loaded the lumber onto the truck, and used a small excavator to pull out the cemented posts. The work took most of the afternoon, and by 6 p.m., my field looked like a war zone with holes in the ground, piles of torn-up grass, and tire tracks everywhere. But at least the playground was gone. I thought that would be the end of it. The spring festival came and went that weekend without the big playground reveal Karen had planned. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had to apologize to the residents and admit the error, which must have been humiliating for her. But on Monday morning, my newly installed security cameras caught something interesting. At 3 a.m., a car pulled up to the edge of my property. 2 figures got out, and even in the grainy night vision footage, I recognized one of them as Karen. They were carrying something, and they walked to the area where the playground had been. It took me a moment to realize what they were doing. They were hammering wooden stakes into the ground with signs attached to them. I threw on clothes and ran outside, but by the time I got there, they were already driving away. I walked over to examine the stakes. There were 4 of them, positioned around the perimeter of where the playground had been. The signs read, "Future Meadowbrook Community Playground coming soon, HOA approved." I could not believe it. After everything, Karen was still trying to claim my property. I went back inside and immediately emailed the security footage to Richard, along with photos of the signs. His response came within an hour, even though it was barely 6 a.m. "This is trespassing and possibly harassment. I'm going to file for a restraining order against Karen Mayfield and send a much stronger cease and desist letter to the HOA board. This has gone too far." The legal process moved faster than I expected. By Wednesday, we were in court for a hearing on the restraining order. Karen showed up with Gregory Winters, the HOA attorney, and she looked tired and angry. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Patricia Rodriguez, reviewed the evidence, including the security footage. "Miss Mayfield," the judge said, "can you explain why you were on Mr. Quinn's property at 3 in the morning?" Karen glanced at her attorney, who nodded slightly. "Your Honor, I was simply marking the area where the HOA intends to eventually build the playground. We are working with the county to resolve the property dispute." "What dispute?" Judge Rodriguez asked. "According to these documents, Mr. Quinn's ownership is clear and uncontested." "We believe there may have been an error in the original property recording," Gregory Winters said. "We are researching the title history to determine if the parcel boundaries were incorrectly documented." Richard stood up. "Your Honor, this is a completely frivolous argument. There is no title dispute. The HOA made an error in their plot maps, and rather than admit it and move on, they are now harassing my client and trespassing on his property in the middle of the night." Judge Rodriguez looked back at Karen. "Miss Mayfield, do you have any actual evidence of a title error, or are you simply hoping to find something?" Karen's silence was answer enough. "I am granting the restraining order," the judge said. "Miss Mayfield, you are to stay at least 100 yards away from Mr. Quinn and his property. No contact, direct or indirect. If you violate this order, you will be arrested. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Karen said quietly as we left the courthouse. I felt relieved but also exhausted. This whole situation had consumed weeks of my life over what should have been a simple property issue. Richard walked me to my car. "This should be the end of it," he said, "but keep those cameras running just in case." I drove home thinking about what a nightmare the whole experience had been. But when I pulled into my driveway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was fresh construction activity in my field again. Not playground equipment this time, but surveying stakes and what looked like the beginning of a fence line. I jumped out of my car and ran toward the field. 3 workers were installing fence posts, and there was a truck from a fencing company parked on the grass. I recognized the company name, Meadowbrook Fencing, and realized with a sinking feeling that it was probably another HOA-approved project. "Stop!" I yelled as I ran toward them. "What are you doing?" The foreman, a burly guy with a beard, looked up from his work. "Building a fence. We got a work order from the HOA. This is private property," I said. "You need to stop right now." The foreman pulled out a work order and showed it to me. It was signed by Dale Harrison, the HOA vice president, and indicated that they were installing a fence to protect community common area from encroachment. I called the police for what felt like the 100th time. Then I called Richard, who sounded as frustrated as I felt. "They are doing this because Karen is under a restraining order. They are using Dale as a proxy. This is absolutely unacceptable." Officer Martinez showed up again, along with Officer Chen. They looked tired of dealing with this situation, but they did their job professionally. After reviewing my property documents yet again and examining the work order, they told the fencing crew to cease work. "This is getting ridiculous," Officer Martinez said to me after the workers had left. "Have you considered a civil lawsuit? Maybe that would finally get their attention." "That is exactly what we are going to do," Richard said. He had driven over after I called him, and he was already making notes in a legal pad. "We are suing the HOA for trespassing, property damage, harassment, and any other cause of action I can think of. And I am also going to file a complaint with the county about how they issued those permits in the first place." The lawsuit was filed the following week. We sued the Meadowbrook HOA, Karen Mayfield individually, and Dale Harrison individually for multiple counts of trespassing, property damage, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We asked for actual damages, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. The total claim was for $150,000. The local news picked up the story, which I had not expected. A reporter from a Riverside television station called me and asked for an interview. I was hesitant at first, but Richard thought it might be helpful to get public opinion on our side. We did the interview in my field, with the torn-up ground and fence posts visible in the background. "This is a case of an HOA that got too big for their britches," I explained to the camera. "They assumed they could do whatever they wanted, And when they made a mistake, instead of owning up to it, they doubled down and kept violating my property rights. The story aired that evening, and by the next morning it had gone viral on social media. I started getting calls and emails from other people with HOA horror stories, from reporters wanting follow-up interviews, and even from a few lawyers offering their services. The HOA community was also responding, but not in the way I expected. On Thursday, I received a call from Patricia, the third board member I had seen at the HOA meeting. She sounded nervous and apologetic. "Mr. Quinn, my name is Patricia Foster. I am on the HOA board, but I want you to know I had nothing to do with these continued violations. I have been arguing with Karen and Dale for weeks that we needed to just admit the mistake and move on." "I appreciate that," I said cautiously, unsure where this was going. "I am calling because there is an emergency HOA meeting tonight. Several residents have called for a vote to remove Karen and Dale from the board. They are furious about the lawsuit and the assessment money that was wasted. I think you deserve to know that not everyone in the community supports what happened to you." That evening, Richard and I decided to attend the meeting, even though we had not been officially invited. The clubhouse was packed when we arrived, with standing room only. The atmosphere was tense, with residents talking in tight groups and shooting angry looks at the board table. Patricia called the meeting to order, but before she could even go through the agenda, a resident stood up and demanded the floor. It was the young guy I had spoken to before, and he was holding a stack of papers. "I want to talk about the lawsuit," he said. "I did some research, and according to our HOA bylaws, board members can be held personally liable for actions they take outside the scope of their authority. Karen and Dale decided to keep building and trespassing after they knew it was the wrong property. That means our insurance probably will not cover the lawsuit, which means our HOA fees are going to skyrocket to pay for their mistakes." The room erupted in angry voices. Other residents stood up, shouting questions and accusations at the board. Karen tried to defend herself, arguing that she was acting in the best interests of the community, but no one was listening. Dale sat silent, his face red and sweating. Finally, a formal motion was made to remove Karen Mayfield and Dale Harrison from the board immediately. The vote was not even close. Of the residents present, over 90% voted in favor of removal. Karen stood up, tears streaming down her face, and walked out of the meeting without another word. Dale followed shortly after, though he paused to mutter something about consulting his own attorney. Patricia took over as acting president and asked if she could speak with Richard and me privately after the meeting. We agreed, and an hour later, after the crowd had dispersed, we sat down with her in a small office attached to the clubhouse. "Mr. Quinn, on behalf of the HOA, I want to formally apologize for everything that has happened," Patricia said. "This was a massive failure on multiple levels, and you have been treated terribly. I have spoken with our insurance company and our attorney, and we would like to discuss a settlement." "We are listening," Richard said. "The HOA will pay for all damages to your property, including restoration of your field to its original condition. We will also pay your attorney's fees to date, and we are prepared to offer an additional $25,000 in compensation for the harassment and stress you have endured." I looked at Richard, who gave a slight nod. "We will also need a written agreement that the HOA acknowledges my property boundaries and will never attempt to use my land for any purpose," I added. "Absolutely," Patricia agreed. "We will have it drawn up in a formal settlement agreement." The settlement was finalized within 2 weeks. The HOA paid a landscaping company to repair my field, filling in the holes, reseeding the grass, and removing all traces of the construction. They paid Richard's fees, which had climbed to $18,000, and they cut me a check for $25,000. The written agreement was recorded with the county, making it part of the permanent property record, but the story did not end there. About a month after the settlement, I got a call from Officer Martinez. He asked if I could come down to the station to discuss the case. When I arrived, he led me to a conference room where a detective I did not know was waiting. "Mr. Quinn, I am Detective Sarah Kimball," she said. "I have been investigating some irregularities related to your case, and I wanted to ask you a few questions." "What kind of irregularities?" I asked. "We have been looking into how the county issued permits for the wrong parcel," she explained. "It turns out that someone altered the plot maps that were submitted with the permit application. The original maps the HOA received from the developer were correct, but the maps submitted to the county had your parcel number changed to show it as common area." My stomach dropped. "Someone intentionally changed them." "That is what it looks like. We are trying to determine who had access to the documents and who might have made the changes. I understand you had significant interactions with Karen Mayfield, the former HOA president. Did she ever say anything that might indicate she knew the maps were wrong?" I thought back through all my conversations with Karen. No, she always seemed convinced she was right. She genuinely believed it was HOA property. Detective Kimball made some notes. "What about Dale Harrison?" "I had less interaction with him, but he also seemed to believe they had the right property. Why would someone intentionally change the maps? That is what we are trying to figure out. One theory is that the correct parcel, 253, was not suitable for a playground for some reason, maybe slope or drainage issues. Someone may have looked for a better location and simply changed the paperwork to match." Over the next few weeks, I learned more about the investigation from occasional updates from Detective Kimball. It turned out that Dale Harrison had been the one who handled the permit application, and forensic analysis of the documents showed that the alterations had been made on his computer. When confronted with the evidence, he initially denied it but eventually admitted that he had changed the parcel number because the original location was too close to a drainage easement. "I just wanted to find a better spot for the kids," he told investigators. "I did not think it would be a big deal. The land was not being used for anything anyway." Dale was charged with falsifying government documents and fraud. It was a felony, and he ended up pleading guilty as part of a deal that gave him probation and community service instead of jail time. He also had to pay a fine and was banned from serving on any HOA board in the future. Karen, despite her aggressive behavior, was not charged with anything criminally. The investigation showed she genuinely had not known about the altered documents. However, she did face a civil lawsuit from several Meadowbrook residents who claimed she had been negligent in her duties as HOA president. That case was still pending last I heard. As for me, life returned to normal gradually. My field recovered beautifully from the landscaping work, and by summer it was green and lush again. I installed a permanent fence around my property boundary, partially to mark it clearly and partially for my own peace of mind. I also kept the security cameras running. The settlement money was a nice windfall, but honestly, I would have preferred to never go through the whole ordeal. The stress, the time, the constant conflict, it wore me down more than I like to admit. But there was also something satisfying about standing up for my rights and winning. The Meadowbrook HOA eventually found a new location for their playground on an actual piece of common area property. They had to scale back their plans significantly because they had blown so much money on the first failed attempt, but they did manage to install a basic swing set and slide. I drove by it once out of curiosity. It looked nice, and there were kids playing on it, which is what they had wanted all along. I still live in my house next to Meadowbrook, and I have had no further issues with the HOA. Patricia served out the rest of Karen's term as president and did a good job from what I could tell. The community seemed to stabilize after all the drama. Looking back on the whole experience, what strikes me most is how quickly things can spiral out of control when people refuse to admit mistakes. If Karen had simply stopped construction that first day when I showed her my deed, verified the property boundaries, and apologized, this could have been resolved in a week. Instead, her pride and certainty that she was right led to months of conflict, legal action, criminal charges, and tens of thousands of dollars in wasted money. I have told this story to friends and family, and the most common reaction is disbelief that an HOA could be so reckless. But after connecting with other people who reached out to me following the news coverage, I learned that HOA overreach is far more common than I realized. There are thousands of stories of HOAs fining people for ridiculous violations, trying to control what colors people paint their houses, and generally acting like petty dictators over their little domains. The difference in my case was that the HOA did not just overstep with rules and fines, they literally built on property they did not own. That elevated it from annoying to illegal, which is why I was able to fight back so effectively. But it made me grateful that I am not actually part of the HOA. Those 73 families in Meadowbrook are stuck with whatever the board decides, and if the board makes mistakes, the residents pay for it in increased fees and assessments. There was one more interesting development a few months later. I was contacted by a producer from a cable television show that features property disputes and legal conflicts. They wanted to do an episode about my case, filming a reenactment and interviewing the people involved. I declined, partly because I was tired of dealing with the whole thing, but also because I did not want to restart any conflicts with my neighbors. Richard thought I should have done it. "You could have made good money from that," he told me over lunch one day. "And your story deserves to be told as a warning to other HOAs. The story is already out there," I said. "The news coverage and social media did that. I do not need to be on television." He shrugged. "Fair enough." But for what it is worth, this was one of the most interesting cases I have handled in 20 years of practice. Usually, property disputes are boring boundary disagreements. This was a whole other level. I raised my glass. Here is to never dealing with something like this again. "I will drink to that," Richard agreed. As I write this now, almost a year after the playground first appeared in my field, I can finally say the whole ordeal feels like it is truly behind me. The grass in my field shows no signs of the construction. My property boundaries are clearly marked and legally documented beyond any doubt, and I have not had a single interaction with anyone from the Meadowbrook HOA in months. But I did make one decision as a result of everything that happened. I had been thinking about selling my property eventually and maybe moving somewhere with more land. Now, I have decided to stay. This is my home and I fought for it. Nobody is going to push me off my own property or make me feel unwelcome. If anything, the whole experience made me more committed to staying right where I am. I also became something of a local expert on property rights and HOA issues. I have had several people reach out to me for advice when they ran into problems with their own HOAs, and I have been happy to share what I learned and connect them with Richard when they needed legal help. There is a whole community of people out there fighting against HOA overreach, and I am glad to be part of it. One of the questions people ask me most often is whether I am angry at Karen personally. The honest answer is no, Not anymore. I was furious during the conflict, especially when she kept trespassing and refusing to acknowledge reality. But now, with distance and perspective, I mostly feel sorry for her. She was so invested in being right, in being the HOA president who brought this wonderful playground to the community, that she could not accept information that contradicted her narrative. That kind of rigid thinking does not just hurt other people, it destroys the person who holds it. Dale, on the other hand, I have less sympathy for. He knowingly falsified documents, which is not a mistake or a misunderstanding. That is deliberate fraud. The fact that he thought it was no big deal to change property boundaries on official permits shows a fundamental lack of ethics. I am glad he faced criminal consequences, even if they were relatively minor. The broader lesson I took from all this is about the importance of verification and humility. When someone tells you that you are wrong, especially about something as serious as property ownership, the correct response is to double-check your information, not to dig in harder and insist you are right. Karen could have avoided everything by simply saying, "Let me verify our records on that first morning." Dale could have avoided criminal charges by using the correct parcel number in the first place, even if it meant the playground location was not ideal. But people do not like admitting they might be wrong. It feels like weakness or failure. In reality, being able to say, "I made a mistake," is a sign of strength and integrity. I wish more people understood that. My life now is quiet and peaceful, which is exactly what I wanted when I bought this property 8 years ago. I work from home as a software consultant, which gives me flexibility and a good income. I have my 3 acres of land, my house, and my privacy. The field where the playground briefly stood is empty again. Just grass and sky and the occasional deer that wanders through in the early morning. Sometimes, when I am sitting on my back porch with coffee, I look out at that field and remember the morning I woke up to find construction equipment and workers swarming over it. It feels almost surreal now, like something that happened to someone else. But then I see the fence line marking my property boundary, a permanent reminder of the battle I fought and won. I do not regret buying this property, despite everything that happened. If anything, the experience taught me that I am more stubborn than I thought, and more willing to fight for what is mine. Those are good things to know about yourself. And I learned that the legal system, for all its flaws and frustrations, does work when you have clear evidence and a good attorney. Richard and I still talk regularly, though thankfully not about legal crises. He has become something of a friend, and we get together for lunch every few weeks to catch up. He tells me about his other cases, and I tell him about my projects and life. He always asks if the HOA has caused any more problems, and I always tell him no. Everything is quiet. The Meadowbrook development itself has changed a bit over the past year. Several families have moved out and new ones have moved in, which is normal for any neighborhood. The playground they eventually built on the correct property is well used and seems to be exactly what they wanted. I am genuinely happy they got their playground in the end, just not on my land. There is a part of me that wonders what would have happened if I had simply agreed to the easement, letting them keep the playground where they built it. Would it have been easier? Probably. Would I have avoided months of stress and conflict? Definitely. But I also would have set a precedent that my property rights did not matter, that the HOA could do whatever they wanted, and I would just go along with it. That was not acceptable to me then, and it is not acceptable to me now. Property rights are fundamental in this country. When you own land, you have certain protections and powers that come with that ownership. And HOA, no matter how well-intentioned, does not get to override those rights just because it is more convenient for them. That principle was worth fighting for, even when the fight was exhausting and frustrating. I have also thought a lot about what drives people to join HOA boards. Some people, like Patricia, genuinely want to help their community and make their neighborhood better. But others, like Karen, seem to crave the power and authority that comes with the position. They want to be in charge, to make decisions, to have people listen to them. And when that power is challenged, they fight back aggressively rather than questioning whether they might be wrong. HOAs can serve useful purposes, maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and enforcing reasonable standards that protect property values. But they can also become petty tyrannies when the wrong people get control. The residents of Meadowbrook learned that lesson the hard way, but at least they took action once they understood what was happening. Removing Karen and Dale from the board was the right decision, and it showed that the democratic processes built into HOA bylaws can work when residents are engaged. As for me, I am just glad to have my peaceful life back. I wake up when I want, work on projects I find interesting, and enjoy my property without interference. The surveyor's maps that proved my ownership sit in my filing cabinet, hopefully never to be needed again but available if they ever are. The security camera footage from that night when Karen installed the signs is backed up in multiple locations, just in case. I learned a lot about myself during this ordeal. I learned that I am willing to fight when necessary, but I also learned that I much prefer peace. I learned that having good documentation is crucial, and that a good attorney is worth their weight in gold. I learned that some people will never admit they are wrong, no matter how much evidence you present. And I learned that sometimes, standing up for yourself means becoming a symbol for something larger, even when you did not ask for that role. The media attention was strange and uncomfortable, but it did lead to some positive outcomes. Several states have introduced legislation to increase oversight of HOAs and create better processes for property owners to challenge HOA actions. I do not know if my case had any direct influence on that, but I like to think it contributed to a broader conversation about HOA accountability. In the end, I got everything I wanted from the legal case: my property restored, compensation for my time and stress, and a clear acknowledgement that I was right. The settlement was fair, and the HOA followed through on all their obligations. Justice was served, both civilly and criminally. You cannot really ask for more than that. But beyond the legal victory, I got something more valuable: confidence in my ability to stand up for myself, proof that doing the right thing can lead to the right outcome, and a really interesting story to tell at parties. People love hearing about my HOA nightmare, and I've gotten pretty good at telling it in a way that captures both the absurdity and the seriousness of what happened. So here I am, 1 year later, sitting on my back porch on a beautiful California evening, looking out at my 3 acres of land that nobody can ever build on without my permission. The grass is green, the sky is clear, and everything is exactly as it should be. The playground that started this whole mess exists now only in photographs and memories. A cautionary tale about the importance of checking your facts before you start construction. And somewhere in Riverside, Karen Mayfield is probably still convinced that she was right all along, that I was just a difficult neighbor who made a big deal out of nothing. That is fine. She can believe whatever she wants. I have my property, my peace of mind, and the satisfaction of knowing that when it mattered, I stood my ground and won. That is good enough for me.